Hello, friends, and thank you again for joining us from your home, your car, wherever you are listening to this on podcasts or Facebook, however it is, for joining Lou and myself. Hi, Lou.
How are we doing today? Facebook, YouTube, we're all over the place.
Yeah. All right, so we're still on chapter 13, a very important chapter because the first section of the chapter 13 talked about the body, the mind, the intellect. And the second, that was called the field, the kshetra, the field. And then Krishna talked about the 20 qualities of a jnani. In order to get to know that consciousness that knows the field, what do you have to be? What qualities do you have to have within you? So we spent that time talking about those 20 qualities. And starting now, he's going to be talking about what is known as the kshetrajna. Kshetrajna is that which knows the kshetra. Now, this verse is a little heavy, takes a little bit of effort on your part to try and understand it, but it gives you a lot of knowledge. So just bear with me. So imagine that you're in a dark room and there's some object that you have to look at. You need to take a flashlight and you need to shine that light onto that object in order for that object to be perceived. Right? You with me there?
Yes.
Okay. So, similarly, recognize that your body, assume that it is alive. Of course, it's alive, your body, your mind, your intellect. But how do you know that it is alive? How do you know when you say, I am asleep, I am dreaming, I am eating, I am thinking, I am laughing? How do you know that? That part that knows it is what we're talking about. Now the rest of this chapter is going to be talking about the kshetrajna, that which knows anything and everything that is apart from itself. That is what we call consciousness. When it is free-floating consciousness, that's known as unconditioned consciousness. When that consciousness connects with your mind or your intellect, and you have that consciousness in your mind, that's known as conditioned consciousness. That might be a little hard for beginners to understand, so let's put it aside. Just think of consciousness. So verse 13 says, and I will read here, I will declare that which has to be known, which, having known, one enjoys immortality. I will tell you what has to be known. And once you know it, you will enjoy immortality. Beginninglessness is the supreme Brahman. That means no beginning. Supreme Brahman has no beginning. That is called neither Sat, S-A-T, neither Sat, which is existent, nor Asat, A-S-A-T, which is non-existent. Little complicated. As I said, it's heavy, it's hard to understand, but once you grasp it, it's a lot of fun. So verse 13 to verse 19, these verses talk about something known as Neyam. Neyam means that which has to be known. So what has to be known? This, what we're talking about. So the first thing we have to recognize is that when your mind is clogged with thoughts, desires, all worldly things, it becomes harder to understand certain things. As this noise of the desires and the outside world gets less and less and less, your mind becomes sharper and you're able to see things more clearly. That's why people who go into spirituality, as they rise in the spirituality, become more successful in the world, more successful in their business ventures. People flock to them. They like dealing with them. They like doing business with them. They say, this person is honest, spiritual, I like dealing with him. And yeah, even if he charges me a little bit more, it's okay. I can get something cheaper somewhere else, but I like dealing with this shopkeeper. He seems to be straightforward, honest. There's some vibes about him that I like. Why? Because your mind is pure. So when that happens, when your mind is clean, pure, You recognize the kshetragnya, the consciousness, you yourself, because we tend to use our consciousness even to look at ourselves. So forgive me as I look at my notes. Kshetragnya, right now, as long as you have a body, mind, and intellect, identifies, unfortunately, that consciousness, yours and mine, identifies with the kshetra, identifies with the body, mind, and intellect, thinking it is the body, mind, and intellect. You say, I am this thing that I'm seeing in the mirror. You are not. You are just pure consciousness. This body is just a vehicle that you're riding in for this lifetime. The next time, my friend, you will be riding in a different body, a different vehicle, but you will still be you. You are that consciousness, and that's all you are. So the kshetragnya tends to identify with the kshetra, the body, mind, intellect, and therefore doesn't recognize itself. Another fellow student, I say fellow student because I'm a student, he's a student too, he had a question. He said, I feel that I cannot appreciate that Brahman is me. Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I cannot appreciate that. He says, I wish I could get rid of my vasanas, my desires. Then, my friend, if you could do that, you would be self-realized. When you got rid of your vasanas, then you would recognize that you're Brahman, and you would recognize that you're no longer the body, mind, intellect, and you would no longer have desires. So that's a good goal to have, to be able to see that you're one with Brahman, that you are Brahman, and that you have no more vasanas or desires. So it's a good goal, but it's hard to convince somebody at that point to say, why is it so difficult for me to recognize that I am Brahman? Why do I see God and me as being separate? We say, God, please help me. We look up. We say, God is up there, I'm down here, because we think of ourselves as separate. So kshetragnya is identified with the body and the mind and the intellect, when actually the kshetragnya is a witness of the body. The scriptures say it is the seer, the knower, and the witness of the body. It sees the body, it knows the body, it is the witness of the body. And stick with me, you will understand this clearly when we talk about a dream and the dream world and waking up and seeing that that dream was just unreal. You've all had this experience. So just stick with me for a few minutes. The seer, the knower, the witness, doesn't recognize itself. Once you recognize the kshetragnya, the consciousness, you, according to this verse, become immortal. Because right now you're identified with the body. We think when the body is sick, disabled, or die, we think we die. We don't. We live on, we just come back in a different form. So we are beginningless, because we're always there, always. We've been here for thousands of lives. Brahman has always been there. When you say beginning, you mean that there has to be an end. When there's a birth, there has to be a death. Whereas we say the Atman is never born and never dies. It's always been there and always will be there, never dies. That's a very high concept to understand. Don't even think about, because it'll drive me crazy, drive us all crazy when we start to think, well, how did it? Don't go there.
Yeah.
So we cannot say that the Brahman is existing, because it's really not. Where do we see it? It's not existing. Yet we cannot say it's non-existing. So it's neither Sat nor Asat. What does this mean? So on a dark night, three examples I'll give you. On a dark night, you say, is there any light? No, there's no light. You look at the moon, and obviously something is reflecting off that. The sunlight, the light is reflecting off it. And you say, well, the whole area must be flooded with light, except that where the moon is, it gets an opportunity to reflect off the moon, so we see it. There's nothing else to reflect off of it, so right. I don't see the light. Another example, in a vacuum. If there's a vacuum and you pass light through it, this is something we did in physics, you don't see the light passing through the vacuum. Right, Lou?
Right.
But if you introduce a few specks of dust in it, Wherever the light hits the dust particle, you see it. You see light reflecting. Doesn't mean the light is not there when the dust particles are not there. It's just that because it's a vacuum, you don't see it.
So existence doesn't depend on our perception.
That's right. So you don't see the Brahman doesn't mean that the Brahman doesn't exist, yet you think it doesn't exist. So Kshetrajna illumines the body, mind, and intellect. Therefore, you see everything else. But Brahman itself is objectless. Brahman actually means large, gross, very large. And Kshetrajna says, I am. Constantly, from birth until death, you keep saying, I am, I am, I am. I'm a young man, I'm a young woman, I'm a grown man, etc. So, last example for this is that of a dream. Now, bear with me. When you're asleep, when you're dreaming, if you were to know that there's a waking state, you would only be awake. So, during the dreaming state, you do not know that there's a waking state. The scriptures analogize this to saying when you're awake and you're in your life, it is like a dream state to you. Because right now you're walking around in a dream state according to that sphere. Right now you don't know that there's another state there. Just like when you're dreaming, you don't know that there's a waking state. Okay? When you're dreaming, if I were to inject my thoughts into you and say, you're just dreaming, this is just a dream, this is not real, you would not be able to comprehend that because you're asleep. You don't know the waker, you don't know the waking state. When you wake up, you say, this is real, that was just a dream. Spiritually self-realized people, when they become self-realized, say, this is real, this state. That which I was living and thinking is real was just a dream. Okay, Lou, did I make that clear?
Yes, you did. And this is a terrific episode. When I was going through mindfulness, I learned this as the observer position, was the term that was used while I was going through it. We have your flashlight, your metaphor that you used at the beginning of going into a dark room with a flashlight. Our flashlight are our sense organs, and consciousness and Brahman doesn't activate our sense organs. So it's hard for us to wrap our minds around it. So that's a difficult struggle for us because that's the way we see things. That's the way we perceive things. And we have to perceive this in a different way, more spiritually, I guess.
Yeah. So it is well known in spirituality, in the scriptures, that Brahman, Atman, the self, cannot be known by the 5 sense organs of the body. Cannot. Right. You cannot see it, you cannot taste it. You know, people who say, well, God revealed himself to me. That's not true. Can't be possible. God doesn't reveal himself or herself to you because God is not an object. He's not a person. You may think you had a vision of God, and that's great. That's wonderful if you did that. But that was not actual God revealing himself or herself or itself to you. So there are 2 different states of consciousness. Either you're dreaming or you're awake, right? And for us, you're either deep sleep. That's not a state of consciousness. That's an absence of your consciousness. There's a certain part of you that says, I am in deep sleep. But really, you consider 2 states of consciousness, 2 different ones, either dreaming or awake. Similarly, it's either the state that we're in right now or a state of self-realization. Those who become self-realized often leave and go up into the Himalayas and say, this is where I want to be. Rarely do they come down and be with the rest of the world, such as Buddha, to say, I want to use what I have to get everybody else to come back with me, or Jesus Christ. It's like being locked in this cave, dark, for whole lifetimes, and generations of others, your older people have said, this is where you live, with this fireplace. There's no such thing as sunlight. They don't know anything about it.
Right.
And then you find a way, somebody shows you the way, and you go through this long tunnel, you see light at the end of the tunnel, you come out and say, wow, there's light. Many people will just say, okay, listen, nobody's going to follow me if I go back, and say, come, I'll show you. because I've tried, others have tried, nobody wants to come. I'm going to go back down there and I'm going to try very hard to convince people, yes, go through this tunnel. You might find it hard in the beginning, but I promise you there's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's beautiful sunlight and grass and trees that you've never experienced out there. How many people would actually believe you and come?
I know, right? Yeah.
And this is what our rishis, munis, seers have said for many, 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 many years, thousands of years. And they tell us, listen to these scriptures. There's light at the end of the tunnel. There's green grass. There's sunlight. There's all kinds of beauty there. Just follow me. And yet we don't follow them. So
this is such a huge concept and a tough concept, but it's incredibly simple too. The first time you realize, when you have a desire, for example, and the first time you realize that I don't desire this, my mind desires this, my sense organs desire this, my body desires this, I don't desire this. The first time you get there, it's a crack in the door, and then you start to understand that concept and you use it a little more and a little more and a little more. And it's simple when you start with the small steps. Everyone thinks about the end result of being very spiritual, but just that separation between who you are and what your mind is so important.
So similarly, Lou, and that's a great point that you made, if we can all start by being a little less selfish, that also opens that little crack in the door. So there's many different ways in which I found that it works. If you think to yourself, selfishly, then you're going back the old route, the old files. If you open the door to say, I'm going to be a little less selfish, you're on the path to spirituality. Similarly, fear. Anytime there's fear, there's always that feeling that there's something about that will bother me selfishly, hurt me, make me less, make me more poor, or take away something that belongs to me. That fear, if you're not selfish, if you don't think of yourself, there is no fear. A self-realized person does not have any fear. In fact, in Sanskrit, the term for a self-realized person is the fearless one. So,
and our mind is designed to present us with fears. It's always supposed to tell us there's a bear in the back of the cave. That's how we survive. But we need to separate us from our minds. I've been telling people lately when I've been talking about it, it's kind of like walking your dog. Your dog gets scared and starts barking, but you look at the dog and say, everything's okay. You understand that the dog's agitated and it's doing its job, but you kind of understand that you're not the dog. You don't need to be scared, right?
Good way of looking at it, yes. Yeah. So let me get back to where we left off. Mm-hmm. We left off where we're talking about Jnayam, that which is to be known, and Jnanam, which is knowledge, right? So we need to know this. So in order to get there first, bear with me, what do we look for throughout life? We look for happiness. We look for what is known as bliss. And we're not looking for just happiness that is going to be taken away from us in a short while because whatever we got has changed or we have changed. We're looking for happiness that is always there, that is permanent, that cannot be taken away from you, that doesn't end. Krishna says, I will declare that which ought to be known, the self, the Atman, the Brahman, and pure consciousness. And knowing this, you will enjoy immortality, is what he says. The self is in a state of complete bliss. Okay, bear with me. The self, that is you, the real you, Brahman, inside, is complete bliss. When you get there, you are completely happy. Somebody else, another fellow student said, what makes me happy? What is real happiness? Does that mean I have to smile all the time or laugh all the time? The self may not laugh. You may not laugh when you're self-realized. Jesus didn't laugh all the time, but he was happy. Buddha didn't laugh all the time, but he was happy. It depends on what your innate personality before you became self-realized was like. If you were a whistler, you'll be whistling. If you were a singer, you'll be singing. If you were somebody who woke up in the middle of the night in your dream and you were laughing, you'll be laughing all the time. But majority of people don't do that. So happiness is what you really are. That's your real core personality. That's the self. When you are not there, then what happens? There's a void. There's a void because you're not one with the self. What happens to fill that void? Desires come up. Now, these are stepwise things that you should take a paper and pencil and write it down. When you're not the self, when you're not self-realized, there's a void. When the void is there, desires come in to say, if I got this, then I'd be happy. If I got that, I'd be happy. If I was $1,000,000 would make me happy. This house would make me happy. That food would make me happy. Then you get that. You get the $1,000,000. You get a house. You get the food that you're looking for. And you find that the happiness that you thought you had, which you did get for a short period of time, disappears. You start to find flaws in the house. The food doesn't taste exactly the way it tasted when you first desired it. The $1,000,000 makes you feel, I want another $1,000,000. So you find unhappiness. So that void that you thought you'd fill with the desires, bear with me, is still there. The desires only generate more desires. Okay? So you've now gone from one number of desires to a greater number of desires, and you've not fulfilled anything. So you are born with desires, and throughout that life that you're born with those desires, you actually accumulate more desires. Each time you do an action, you're generating more desires, because that action does not fulfill your desires, it actually generates more desires. So that birth that you have now, and many times before this and many times after this, was really because your vasana said, if I'm born, I have the body to fulfill my desires. That birth is only meant for you to fulfill your desires. That is what your body is meant for. But you're constantly accumulating more desires. That's the problem. When you die, excuse me, when you die, you'll die without those desires being fulfilled. So you come back to life again with a new body, with those same desires again to fulfill those desires. And what this verse is saying is that when you realize this knowledge of self-realization, then those desires are eliminated. And you no longer have to be born. You no longer die, because you're immortal. I mean, you do die, but you don't keep coming back to life again, because you have no desires, therefore no need to come back to life again. So there's neither sat, which is existence, nor asat, non-existence. So it does not exist as the body or the mind or the intellect, Brahman. It does not exist as perception or emotion or thought. It is beyond it. It is not existence. Neither is it non-existence, because you experience it only as the point of self-realization. So you can't say it's non-existent, because self-realized person says, yeah, it's there. He, and only he, the self-realized person, or she, recognizes it when he or she becomes self-realized. So it's there. But it's for the rest of us who are in our dream, it's like saying, I don't know the waking state. So therefore it doesn't exist. It does exist. We're just dreaming. I hope I didn't make that too confusing.
No, I think it's set up nicely by everything we've done to this point, and this is an important episode.
Okay, so I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
So there are two states of consciousness, I said. One is dreaming, one is waking. The difference is that when you're dreaming and you wake up, you're 100% awake. You're not half awake, half asleep, half dreaming. You're either dreaming or you're awake.
Right.
In spirituality, there's a difference. It's not like you go from being an average person identified with the body, mind, and intellect and suddenly become Jesus or Buddha. No. You grow gradually. 10% spiritual development, 20%, 50%, then 100%. To the extent that you are developed, you get those benefits, as opposed to a person who's dreaming. He doesn't wake up 10% awake, 20% awake. No. He either wakes up or he's asleep. So there are two aspects of spiritual development in that percentage-wise. One is you negate the unreal. You say, this doesn't exist. Negate it. Push it away. And you assert what is real. So you assert that there is Brahman, there's Atman, and you negate that this is unreal. So in the scriptures, in the Upanishads, it says Atman. When you talk about Atman, it says neti, neti. Neti means not this. Not this, not this. Neti, neti. You say, what is it? This? No, not this. This? Not this. Neti, neti. Because you can't describe it. You can't understand it. Only if you become it, then you understanding. Problem with all religions, as Swami Parthasarthi says, is that all religions say negate the world, negate the desires of the world, negate the world and its existence. But it doesn't tell you to assert what is real. So that doesn't work, because you can't negate something you have until you actually assert the positives, the real.
Right. Yep.
So you don't like these toys, marbles, little dinky toys, little cars that you liked as a child. You only get to negate them and push them out of your life and saying, they're not important to me, when you find something higher that you like better. You like power, you like wealth, you like money, you like family, you like a wife, you like a children. Then and only then your lower desires fall off. So similarly, religions can tell you, negate all these wishes for the world. Doesn't work until you actually assert that there's a higher power that you are thirsting for. So
that's self-denial without knowledge, right?
Yeah. Self-denial without knowledge. Right. So assert the selfishness, you get rid of that. If you can only get rid of the selfishness, work on these 20 qualities that we talked about in our previous episodes, that is the true royal road to becoming a kshetrajna. So sorry, friends, if I made this a little too heavy for you, but believe me, if you listen to it again, make notes, and do manana, think about it, it starts making a lot of sense. And even if you get from 0 to kindergarten or first grade, where I am, there's a huge difference, huge difference.
Yeah.
You don't even have to get to high school or college. Just get to first grade and you'll see what a beautiful life you have. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Lou.